Karen screamed at me over parking. I'm the judge for her court hearing. Weekends were my sanctuary, a brief respite from the often contentious but always structured world of the courtroom. Trading my judicial robes for comfortable jeans and a baseball cap was a small but necessary act of shedding the weight of responsibility that came with presiding over the legal affairs of Meadowbrook County. While I cherished my role as a judge, a position I had earned through years of dedication and a deep commitment to upholding the law, I also valued the anonymity of blending into the everyday fabric of the community I served. This particular Saturday morning found me navigating the bustling aisles of Farmer Fred's Market, a local institution renowned for its fresh produce and lively atmosphere. I enjoyed the simple act of selecting ripe tomatoes and fragrant herbs, a tangible connection to the community that often felt distant from the elevated bench. Of course, even in the relatively laid-back environment of a farmer's market, the archetype of the HOA Karen was an ever-present possibility. And in Meadowbrook, one name consistently surfaced in local anecdotes of suburban entitlement: Karen Mitchell. Her reputation preceded her like a sharply worded HOA violation notice. Tales of meticulously enforced lawn aesthetics, aggressive confrontations over minor neighborhood infractions, and an unwavering belief in her own unimpeachable authority. I had yet to have a direct encounter with the infamous Karen, but her exploits were well documented in the local online forums and whispered among the courthouse staff. My own approach to life outside the courtroom was decidedly less assertive. I valued politeness and generally preferred to avoid confrontation, a stark contrast to the often adversarial nature of my profession. This preference for peaceful coexistence would be severely tested on this seemingly ordinary Saturday morning. I had just secured the last bag of organic apples and was heading toward the parking lot, a sprawling expanse of asphalt already teeming with weekend shoppers. After a brief search, I spotted an open space a few rows over and carefully maneuvered my sedan into the spot, ensuring I was well within the painted lines. As I switched off the ignition, I heard a sharp, insistent honking from the car behind me. I glanced in my rearview mirror to see a gleaming white SUV, its driver, a woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and oversized sunglasses, gesticulating wildly. Even before she rolled down her window, I had a sinking feeling I was about to have my inaugural Karen encounter. The electric window whirred down, and the woman's voice, amplified by her obvious agitation, cut through the market's cheerful hum. "Excuse me? Excuse you! What do you think you're doing?" I blinked, slightly taken aback. I just parked." "Parked?" she shrieked, her voice laced with disbelief and outrage. "That's not parking. That's obstructing. You're practically on the line. My vehicle is much larger than yours, and I need ample space to maneuver." I took a moment to assess my parking job. While perhaps not perfectly centered, I was certainly within the designated lines, leaving ample room on both sides. "Ma'am," I said calmly, trying to defuse the situation, "I believe I'm parked correctly. There's plenty of space." "Plenty of space?" she scoffed, her eyes narrowing behind her sunglasses. "Are you blind? I can barely open my door. Honestly, some people have no consideration for others. You probably just squeezed into the first available spot without a second thought for anyone else." The accusatory tone, the sweeping generalization, the complete lack of willingness to consider my perspective. It was all textbook Karen. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was off duty and had no desire to engage in a protracted parking lot dispute. "Ma'am," I began again, trying a different approach, "I apologize if you feel inconvenienced. However, I am parked within the lines. Perhaps if you adjust your own positioning slightly." Before I could finish my sentence, she cut me off, her voice reaching a near shout. "Adjust my positioning? Are you serious? I was here first. You're the one who needs to move your inconsiderate little car. Some people just shouldn't be allowed behind the wheel. You probably cause accidents all the time." The personal insult, the escalating volume, the unwavering belief in her own superiority over a minor parking inconvenience, it was a masterclass in Karen behavior. I felt a flicker of annoyance, a brief temptation to pull rank and remind her of the importance of civility, but I resisted. This was not my courtroom, and I had no desire to wield my authority outside of it. "Ma'am," I said finally, my voice firm but still calm. "I am parked legally. I have no intention of moving my car. If you are having difficulty maneuvering, perhaps you could try a different spot." Her face contorted in fury. "Are you refusing to move? Do you know who you're talking to? This is outrageous. I'm going to report you to the market management. You'll be hearing from them." With that, she slammed her car door shut, the sound echoing in the parking lot, and stomped off towards the market entrance, muttering loudly about inconsiderate drivers and the general decline of societal standards. I watched her go, a wry smile playing on my lips. My first direct encounter with a Karen had lived up to the legend. Little did she know that the inconsiderate driver she had just berated might very well be presiding over her future legal entanglements, should fate, or the laws of Meadowbrook County, bring her into my courtroom. The stage was set for a rather interesting day in court. The lingering echo of Karen's furious pronouncements faded into the general hubbub of the farmer's market parking lot. I shook my head slightly, a bemused smile still playing on my lips. The sheer intensity of her reaction to a minor parking disagreement was almost comical. I retrieved my bags from the trunk, the weight of the fresh produce a grounding contrast to the weight of her unwarranted anger. As I walked towards the market entrance, I couldn't help but replay the interaction in my mind. The entitlement, the immediate escalation, the personal insults. It was a textbook display of what had become a familiar societal caricature. I wondered what it was about a perceived parking infraction that could elicit such unbridled fury. Perhaps it was the sense of personal space being violated, or the feeling of being slighted in a public domain. Whatever the underlying cause, the intensity of Karen's reaction was certainly memorable. The rest of my time at the farmer's market was uneventful. I enjoyed the vibrant atmosphere, the friendly banter with the vendors, and the simple pleasure of selecting fresh, local ingredients. The parking lot incident receded into the background, a minor annoyance in an otherwise pleasant morning. However, the name Karen Mitchell lingered in the back of my mind. It was a name I had heard before, associated with various neighborhood disputes and minor civic complaints. While I hadn't paid it much attention previously, the ferocity of the parking lot Karen made the name stick. Monday morning brought the familiar routine of the courthouse, the quiet hum of the HVAC system, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards, the hushed conversations in the hallways. It was a world away from the chaotic energy of the farmer's market parking lot. I settled into my chambers, reviewing the day's docket. A diverse array of cases ranging from traffic violations to small claims disputes. As I scrolled through the list of defendants, a familiar name jumped out at me: Karen Mitchell. She was scheduled for a hearing later in the week, a pretrial conference for a noise ordinance violation. Apparently, her legendary battles over neighborhood tranquility extended beyond just lawn care and parking. The details of the case were brief: multiple complaints from neighbors regarding excessively loud music at unreasonable hours. A wave of grim amusement washed over me. The parking lot Karen, the woman who had screamed at me over a perceived parking injustice, was now scheduled to appear before me in my official capacity as a judge. The irony was almost too perfect. Over the next few days, I found myself occasionally thinking about Karen Mitchell's upcoming hearing. While I prided myself on my impartiality and my ability to separate personal feelings from my judicial duties, I couldn't deny a certain curiosity about her demeanor in a courtroom setting. Would she exhibit the same aggressive entitlement she had displayed in the parking lot? Or would the formal setting of the court elicit a more subdued behavior? I made a conscious effort to review the details of her case thoroughly, ensuring I had a clear understanding of the facts and the relevant ordinances. I wanted to be fully prepared to preside over the hearing fairly and justly, regardless of my prior, less than pleasant interaction with the defendant. The day of Karen Mitchell's pretrial conference arrived. The courtroom was its usual blend of formality and nervous anticipation. The bailiff called the case, and a woman entered the courtroom, accompanied by a somewhat harried-looking attorney. It was her, the woman from the parking lot, Karen Mitchell. She looked slightly different in more formal attire, but the perfectly coiffed blonde hair and the air of self-importance were unmistakable. As she approached the defense table, her gaze swept across the courtroom, seemingly taking in every detail. Then her eyes met mine. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, a brief widening of her eyes that suggested a dawning awareness. It was subtle, fleeting, but I caught it. She didn't immediately connect me to the irate driver in the parking lot, but there was a hint of familiarity, perhaps a sense that she had encountered me somewhere before. I maintained a calm and neutral expression, my judicial demeanor firmly in place. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," I said, my voice measured and professional. "I am Judge, my last name. Please have a seat." Karen sat down, her gaze still lingering on me, a furrow in her brow. Her attorney leaned over and whispered something to her, and she nodded absently, her attention seemingly still fixed on my face. The pretrial conference began, with the prosecution outlining the allegations and Karen's attorney presenting her initial arguments. Karen remained relatively quiet, allowing her attorney to speak on her behalf. However, I noticed her occasional glances in my direction, a persistent undercurrent of unease in her demeanor. As the hearing progressed, I asked clarifying questions, my tone impartial and focused on the facts of the case. Karen answered when directly addressed, her voice noticeably more subdued than it had been in the parking lot, but still carrying a hint of defensiveness. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, though perhaps only I was fully aware of the underlying irony of the situation. The woman who had screamed at me over a parking spot was now standing before me, potentially facing legal consequences for her disruptive behavior in the neighborhood. The stage was set for a truly memorable day in court. The pretrial conference continued, the legal arguments and procedural discussions unfolding with the measured pace typical of courtroom proceedings. Karen Mitchell, while physically present, seemed increasingly distracted. Her initial subdued defensiveness had given way to a palpable nervousness. She fidgeted in her seat, her gaze frequently drifting towards me, a look of growing unease clouding her features. Her attorney, Mr. Henderson, a seasoned but somewhat weary-looking lawyer, presented arguments attempting to minimize the severity of the noise ordinance violations. He spoke of misunderstandings, unintentional disturbances, and the subjective nature of what constituted excessively loud music. Karen occasionally interjected with brief, carefully worded statements, attempting to portray herself as a reasonable homeowner, unfairly targeted by overly sensitive neighbors. Throughout the proceedings, I maintained my judicial impartiality, my questions directed at clarifying the facts and understanding the legal arguments presented by both sides. However, the memory of Karen's parking lot tirade remained a vivid undercurrent in my mind. The contrast between her aggressive entitlement then and her somewhat subdued demeanor now was stark. I couldn't help but wonder when or if the full weight of our prior encounter would dawn on her. The moment began subtly. During a brief recess, as Mr. Henderson conferred with Karen at the defense table, her gaze locked onto mine. This time, there was no fleeting flicker of familiarity. It was a look of intense concentration, as if she were meticulously piecing together fragmented memories. Her brow furrowed, and her lips moved slightly as if silently mouthing words. When the hearing resumed, Karen's demeanor had shifted again. The nervousness was still there, but it was now overlaid with a dawning look of recognition, a slow-burn realization that seemed to be spreading across her face. Her responses to my questions became hesitant, her gaze fixed on me with an almost unnerving intensity. The climax began when I asked Karen a direct question about the frequency and duration of the alleged noise disturbances. "Ms. Mitchell," I said, my voice calm and measured, "the complainants have alleged multiple instances of loud music late into the night. Can you provide the court with a specific timeline of these occurrences?" Karen hesitated, her eyes darting nervously between me and her attorney. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her gaze returning to mine with a look of growing alarm. It was as if she were suddenly seeing me, not just as the presiding judge, but as someone she had encountered before, someone she had antagonized. "Ms. Mitchell?" I prompted gently, waiting for her response. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "Your Honor, have we met before?" Mr. Henderson looked at her sharply, a confused frown on his face. "Karen, what are you talking about? Focus on the question." But Karen's attention was solely on me. Her eyes searched mine, and I could see the pieces clicking into place. The memory of the sunny parking lot, her furious tirade, and the calm, collected driver of the other car finally coalescing into a horrifying realization. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, and a look of utter shock and mortification washed over her features. The entitled HOA Karen, so quick to anger and so certain of her own superiority, was now staring at the judge presiding over her case, the very person she had so rudely berated over a parking spot. The courtroom seemed to fall silent, the hushed whispers and shuffling papers fading into a dull background hum. All eyes seemed to be on Karen as the full weight of her monumental blunder became apparent. "Your Honor," she stammered, her voice trembling, I, I think, I think I remember you. The, the parking lot at Farmer Fred's." Mr. Henderson's head snapped towards her, his confusion now tinged with alarm. "Karen, what are you doing?" But Karen was beyond listening to her attorney. Her gaze remained locked on mine, her face a mask of utter dismay. The self-righteous fury she had displayed in the parking lot was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "Your Honor," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper, I am so incredibly sorry. For my behavior that day, I had no idea." The woman who had screamed at me over a parking spot was now standing before me, her fate potentially resting in my hands. The irony was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. The courtroom, a place of law and order, was now the stage for a deeply personal and profoundly satisfying moment of reckoning. The air crackled with the unspoken weight of Karen's realization. The woman who had so readily judged and condemned a fellow citizen over a minor inconvenience was now facing judgment herself, and the judge was the very person she had treated with such disdain. The stunned silence in the courtroom lingered, broken only by Karen's barely audible stammering and the rustling of Mr. Henderson's increasingly frantic papers. The weight of Karen's realization hung heavy in the air, a palpable shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. Mr. Henderson finally found his voice, his tone a mixture of exasperation and damage control. "Your Honor," he interjected, attempting to regain control of the situation, "I apologize for my client's outburst. Ms. Mitchell is clearly under a great deal of stress." I maintained a calm and neutral expression, my judicial demeanor firmly in place. "Ms. Mitchell," I said, my voice measured and even, "the court recalls a brief but memorable interaction with you outside of these proceedings. While I strive to maintain impartiality in all cases before me, I must admit that your behavior that day was less than civil." Karen's face flushed crimson. "Your Honor, I am so incredibly sorry. I was having a bad day. I made assumptions. I was rude and completely out of line. I had absolutely no idea who you were." Her voice trembled with a mixture of shame and fear. "Indeed, Ms. Mitchell," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "It serves as a potent reminder that we should all strive to treat each other with courtesy and respect, regardless of the setting or our perceptions of one another." I paused for a moment, allowing my words to sink in. The courtroom remained silent, all eyes fixed on Karen, whose earlier arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of mortification. "Mr. Henderson," I continued, addressing Karen's attorney, "let's return to the matter at hand. The prosecution has presented evidence of multiple noise ordinance violations. Ms. Mitchell, do you have any further testimony or evidence to present at this time?" Mr. Henderson, clearly flustered but attempting to salvage the situation, reiterated his earlier arguments about misunderstandings and subjective interpretations of noise levels. Karen remained largely silent, her gaze occasionally flicking towards me with a look of deep regret. As the hearing drew to a close, I summarized the evidence presented and the arguments made by both sides. I acknowledged Mr. Henderson's points but emphasized the multiple complaints from neighbors and the documented instances of excessive noise at unreasonable hours. "Ms. Mitchell," I said, addressing her directly, "the court finds that the prosecution has presented sufficient evidence to support the allegations of noise ordinance violations. While I have taken into account your attorney's arguments and your subsequent apology for your behavior outside of these proceedings, the fact remains that the well-being and peace of your neighbors must also be considered." I then delivered my ruling, a measured and impartial judgment based solely on the evidence presented in court. I imposed a modest fine and a requirement for Ms. Mitchell to adhere strictly to the town's noise ordinances in the future. I also suggested that she consider engaging in more constructive communication with her neighbors to avoid future disputes. As the hearing concluded and the courtroom began to empty, Karen approached the bench, her face etched with remorse. "Your Honor," she said, her voice barely audible, "I truly am sorry for how I acted in the parking lot. I have learned a very valuable lesson." I looked down at her, my expression softening slightly. "Ms. Mitchell," I replied, "I believe you have. I hope this experience will serve as a reminder that respect and courtesy are fundamental to a harmonious community, both inside and outside of a courtroom." It was about the profound and personal impact of Karen's realization within the formal setting of the court. The woman who had screamed at me over a parking spot was forced to face the consequences of her behavior, both her initial arrogance and her subsequent remorse playing out under the impartial gaze of the law. In the weeks and months that followed, a noticeable change occurred in Karen's interactions around Meadowbrook. The aggressive HOA Karen seemed to have been replaced by a more subdued and considerate neighbor. There were even reports of her actively participating in community initiatives, a stark contrast to her previous reputation. I occasionally saw her in town, and each time she offered a respectful and almost shy nod of acknowledgement. The memory of her parking lot fury and her courtroom mortification seemed to have left a lasting impression. The incident served as a powerful reminder that you never truly know who you might encounter in your daily life, and that treating everyone with respect is not just a matter of politeness, but also a matter of potential consequence. For me, it was a bizarre and somewhat satisfying example of the unexpected ways in which the threads of our lives can intertwine, and how even a seemingly insignificant parking lot dispute can lead to a profound, albeit humbling lesson learned in the solemn setting of a courtroom.